I'll just start it off. Hey, welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I'm Scott Warr. And, today we're gonna talk about a little bit different race distance than what we've used to talked about in the past. Most of us have gradually increased our mileage from the shorter mileages, going around the block, to maybe running the turkey trot 5K or 10K. And then we venture into maybe a half marathon, and we worked our way up to the trail runs and these ultra distances. But we're gonna go back to the shorter runs, and we thought we would bring on two guests that could help us find out how we can adapt to these shorter runs after running long runs for so many years. We have Addie Bracy from Sharman Ultra Coaching. She's a sports psychologist at Strive Mental Performance. She's the author of Mental Training for Ultra Running, Your Psychological Skills for Ultra Success, which we have 2 episodes on. We'll link those in the show notes in case you want to go back and listen to those. And she is making her 6th appearance here, which is remarkable. We were just talking about that before we hit record. In addition to that, we have the head coach of Sharman Ultra. He is a record holder with many great achievements, including over 100 ultras, 150 road and trail marathons. He's the record holder for the Grand Slam of ultra running, and he holds the FKT record for running the circumference of the moon with a weight vest. So strap on. We're going to get into this, into the nuances of speed, the training, and the mental prep for these shorter distances. Thank you for coming on, both Addie and Ian.
Thanks, guys. Well, given you mentioned Addie's had 6 times on the show now, is it like Saturday Night Live that after 5 you get a jacket?
Oh, we need to come up with blazers, don't we?
Yeah, well, I think what Ian is doing is he leveraging his many appearances. He has not only a blazer coming, but maybe a car. He's been on many, many times.
Nice. I'm happy with that. Yeah, that sounds great.
Well, wait till you see the car that we can afford, Ian. It's not real spectacular.
Maybe instead of a blazer, maybe we just, because it's Ian's idea, we give away weight vests, right?
Yeah, I saw that coming.
Yeah, they're really cheap to send through the mail.
Hey, Ian actually brought this topic to us, and I thought it was really intriguing, especially after the last time he was on here. He kind of pulled the curtain back and said that he was going to be focusing more on marathons in the coming months, and kind of building his speed up and going for the 26.2 mile distance. And we thought maybe we should talk about going back to these 5Ks, 10Ks. We're coming up here in North America, or I should more specifically here in the United States. Thanksgiving is coming up, and there's a lot of turkey trots out there. And I haven't run a turkey trot in a gazillion years, and maybe it's time for me to get back out there and run these shorter distances. So,
hey, Scott, your last run you and I put together, I think last Saturday was a turkey trot. You didn't know it.
I was the turkey. I know. But Ian, why do we sometimes avoid going back to these shorter distances?
I think a lot of it is that once you get doing longer distances, so particularly trails are mainly associated with ultras, we kind of think of ourselves, our identity is that we're long and slow. And that with that fast stuff is maybe for younger people, or for, high school kids and stuff, or for people who are just getting into it. But there's a lot of reasons to do it anyway. And we'll talk about some specific types of races, a million different things you can still do with this. But I think just the core principle of keep it varied, keep it interesting. This sport involves everything from running around a track to running in mountains and deserts and jungles, and it can last a few minutes or it can last a few days. I mean, there's just been the Sri Chinmoy race in New York, where they run around a 1 mile block in New York for 3,100 miles. So there's a lot of different things you can do. So why pigeonhole yourself or force your identity to be just one small part of that?
Hey, Addie, I got a question for you. You've written the book, Mental Training for Ultra Running, Your Psychological Skills for Ultra Success. Would you change the book much, writing it for a shorter distance? A different table of contents?
Good question.
No, honestly, a lot of the skill sets are the same. It is kind of written in the context of what I think are some of the unique challenges to ultra running that's maybe different from other races, like the sheer length of time you're out there, the more uncontrollable variables, the more like gap between what you're doing in training and what you're racing. So a lot of it is seen through that lens, but the skills are still relevant. Attentional control, confidence, motivation, all the things could still definitely be applied to any event or life, but definitely like shorter running events.
Mm.
All right, Ian and Addie. I'll tell you right now, as I'm thinking through this. Okay, the turkey trot's coming up. I'm a little scared to go out and run a 5K because I've been running these slow zone 2 heart rate, training runs. It seems like a 5K and a 10K, I got to increase my speed. And, we have an old saying in trail and ultra running that speed kills. How am I going to get over that hurdle of my fear to speed up?
Well, I'll start there. I mean, I think the simplest thing is that anything that you're not as good at is probably where you have more gains to be made. And also, when you think about specifically training for a race, so let's say we're now in October, if we're looking towards summer races for next year that are long ultras, that type of thing, this is a great time to focus on speed. So that means doing speed work, maybe doing some shorter races through the winter time. As I'd mentioned on the previous podcast, it's a bit easier to train for the flatter, faster stuff in winter if you live somewhere cold, rather than having to get all the vert on the snowy mountains or switching to skiing, which is certainly an option, but it's just easier to do the running without having to worry about that. So this is a great time to focus on doing something that maybe is a little bit more out of your comfort zone, therefore maybe has more gains to be made. And all other things being equal, if you can increase your speed, increase your engine size, that is going to make you a better, faster runner when you go back to the ultras. So particularly someone maybe who's been doing the same thing for 10 years, they haven't done a 5K or a 10K in that period at all. This could be a good chance to do it. And turkey trots are an ideal way to do it in a low stress, low pressure way. But any short distance race, and we'll, as I said, we'll talk about a few different types of race. So turkey trots are one type of race, but in particular, to bring Addie in here, Addie was a 10,000 meter Olympic trials runner. So she was a top level track runner, and that's a very different thing to what she does now as an ultra runner. But she has a great perspective from training hard for that specific type of thing. So I'll pass it over to you, Addie.
Yeah, I mean, I will echo Ian. I think anything that sounds kind of scary probably means you should be doing it, because maybe that's where you don't feel as comfortable or could improve. I think there's a number of reasons, to add in speed. I think even just changing stress over the course of a year is good. If you're kind of just training in that same zone all the time, it's like you're not really getting much variation in the kind of stress you're putting on your body, which both could cause injuries and burnout and just could cause, slowing down of like adaptations. I mean, I've even talked about, I haven't run a mile in probably 7 or 8 years. And I was talking about maybe spending a month this winter training, like just for a mile, just to see, what I could do if I could maybe run my high school PR or something. That sounds scary, but I think that starting manageable, like I would probably start with even like hill sprints or short hill repeats where you're not too focused on pace yet, but you're kind of working in the mechanics and like the neuromuscular type stuff, and then kind of build the length of duration of the intervals that you're doing speed related. You don't need to go out and try and rip fast mile repeats or 800-meter reps right away. You can kind of build up. And I think it's fun because you see progress tangibly and objectively. I mean, you should with training anyway, but I think sometimes with true speeders, you're kind of trying to maintain a certain race pace for longer. It's kind of fun to see that progress, week to week or every few weeks.
And related to that, with that's just kind of out of the pandemic now, hopefully fully. When it first started and all the races were cancelled, it was quite difficult to do virtual marathons, virtual ultras, but it's pretty easy for someone to go to a track, run 4 laps and just run a mile. So I had quite a lot of my runners who, just for something different and so that they could still have a reason to train, we actually aimed to do a good fast mile. And the first time they did it was a little bit intimidating, but then they kept telling me, oh no, I want to do this again and again. And these are people who were mainly doing 100-milers, really long distances, but they found that it was really enjoyable because it was a breath of fresh air. It was something a little bit different. It really gets those endorphins going by pushing harder as well. Plus, they saw big gains quickly. And if you've been doing the same thing for a long time, you're not going to see those big gains. While if you do something different, it can be super motivating as well as growth for you as a runner to do something that is a bit out of your comfort zone and then get better at it and hopefully see that come back to the stuff that you originally cared about. But in and of itself, it's worth it as well.
All right, coaches, this question. So I'm listening to this and I'm saying, you know what? Okay, I'll take that challenge. I'll get out there and try to do some speed for a period of time. What kind of changes can I experience of getting back on the trail and doing longer? How do I benefit from that compressed session of speed? How do I look up when I get back on the trail and doing long and slow with that behind me? Basically, should I do it? Who wants to go first?
You
Well,
go
I
ahead.
mean, yeah, I mean, generally, I think Ian kind of mentioned this earlier, or maybe it was off when we weren't recording, but obviously for whatever race you're preparing for, the closer you get, the more specific you want to be. But I don't know if this is answering your question, but it's not like an either or. Like my athletes, and I'm sure Ian's too, people training for 100-mile races are still doing speed. That becomes maybe less the emphasis. But it's not like you're doing speed and then, okay, now it's time to just transition back to slow trail running. That's something that should always be kind of incorporated with the emphasis and what you're stressing is most important changing based on what you're preparing for. But in my opinion, you should always kind of be training all the different systems. It's not something that you totally should ever really go away from if you want to kind of continue to make improvements and see, like the highest potential in your performances.
Addie, that was a better answer than the question. Had I known a question to ask to get that kind of response, I would have asked it. That was good. Go ahead, Scott.
I was just curious. When I get out of my vehicle at the trailhead and I'm gonna go down the trail and do my normal training run, there's really not a whole lot of preparation except to make sure my shoes are tied. If I'm training for let's say a 5K or a 10K, what things should I be prepping? Do I need to do some stretching? Do I need to do some hopping up and down in the parking lot or some high steps? Is there I think to me it sounds like shorter runs there's a higher risk of injury. I'm wondering what kind of preparatory things I should be doing. Ian?
Definitely you should be warming up beforehand, but that applies to any speed work you do as well. You don't want to just go straight into it, sitting on the couch, and then zoom as quick as you can as soon as you get out the door. So the kind of things you'd see people doing at a professional track meet or any kind of professional sports team, they're going to be doing things like high knees and butt kicks and skipping and short bursts of sprints as they ease into things, and they're just trying to warm up the muscles, get the muscles firing and ready to go. Also, that you don't just do a 5K having done no fast running at all in preparation, because again, there's more chance of getting injured there. And personally, I'm actually more intimidated by a 5K start line than a 100-mile start line, which sounds,
Really?
without explanation, it sounds crazy. But the reason for that is simply that at a 100-mile start line, I know I've got the first few hours to ease into it, that you're not having to push too much. You're going to be within a range of intensities that are all fairly easy. And you've got time to calibrate that. If you're doing a 5K, you've got to be on the right pace within about a minute. And if you're too aggressive, you're going to blow up and it's going to be a very painful race. If you go too slowly, you're losing time because that's a greater proportion of the race. Well, if you go too slowly in a 100-miler, it doesn't really matter too much. It's already quite slow. And the kind of things that make a difference there are hours and hours you could lose later. So I find it much more intimidating knowing I've got to get it right immediately in a 5K. But this is also a reason not to just do one. I mean, you wouldn't just train for one trail race and then never do another. Well, some might, but that isn't the way you're going to get better at it. Same kind of thing with this. Maybe you do a turkey trot, then you do a jingle bell run, then you do a January or February 10K half marathon. These can be road or trail. But it's just really good to get some practice doing it so that you can learn from that, because if it is less familiar, you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to have races where you go out too fast, you get too excited by the people around you, or probably the most common way of thinking about it is simply that if you're a longer, slower runner, the range of things that are hard, whether it's 5K, 10K, half marathon, they're all just the same bucket of that's hard. And you don't know the fine differences of what's hard that'll last for 20 minutes versus 40 minutes versus 60 minutes. And so doing a little bit more is also helping to improve your judgment of effort, which is a key skill that you need as an ultra runner too. So there's a lot of mental and physical and tactical things you're going to gain from it. But don't just think you're going to nail it the first time, or if you have a bad one the first time, that it's just not for you. It's worth persevering a little bit and hopefully having some fun with it. And like I said, with the people who did these 1-mile solo time trials, they really wanted to do more. In fact, they were pushing me to do more versus me telling them, let's do another one.
Yeah, a 100-miler or a 50-miler is like a death by 1,000 cuts. But a 5K is literally getting your head in a guillotine and having it lopped off all in 1 second. That's why it's so intimidating to get up to the 5K starting line. Besides that, got to get it right in the first minute and going full speed, not warming up. Both of them hurt. at the end of at the finish line, you're dead at both of them, and you're just that's it. And I think that's why the intimidation and why we like the slow and easy go for a long time is a lot more comfortable. As crazy
I'd
as
say a
that sounds.
universal thing for all types of race distance, the way I kind of describe how the race should feel. The first third of the race, you should think you're going too slow. The middle third, you're glad you didn't go too quick in the first third. And the final third, you're hanging on. And in a 5K or 10K, that means that you're not slowing at all. In a 100 miler, it means that you're minimizing that slowdown. But it's the same kind of mentality. That means in a 100 miler, you've got 33 miles where you should be thinking, wow, this is too easy. I should totally speed up. And then you get a bit deeper in and go, I'm glad I didn't because it's getting quite hard now. But same kind of thing. So 5K is basically 3 miles. Mile one is where you're thinking, oh, this is hard, but I could go harder. And you're doubting yourself and thinking that you're going too easy if you're getting it right. By the middle, you're just starting to feel that fatigue, and you realize that if you had gone harder, you'd have paid for it. And then it gets just really hard nearer the end. But I think that's a universal rule that applies to any race. What do you think of that, Addie?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like, I think the physical experiences is maybe a little bit different, but mentally, yeah, I tend to always kind of break races into thirds the same way, and maybe like the impact on pace is different. But yeah, I think that's a good way to break it down. And I don't know, I totally agree with what Don said. And at least when I first transitioned to trails and especially ultra distances, yes, you can't like hesitate in a 5K or 10K. If you even like hesitate and fall off the pace or something, especially when I was doing track races, you know, you don't want to like lose connection with people. It's kind of done, but it's like 3 minutes or 5 minutes that's painful, where in 100 milers, you know, I've suffered for 4 hours or 5 hours. So I think it's, you know, kind of comparing apples to oranges in some ways. The experience is, it's hard to compare, but I do think the overall kind of breakdown and framework is very similar, but the experience maybe is a little bit different.
You know, after you said it's hard to compare, I'm going to ask you to. I very rarely on this podcast do we talk to world-class, 10K, elite athletes like you, Addie. That final lap or two in a track 10K where you are hanging on, maybe your lungs are on fire. How does that compare to the last 10 miles of a 100-mile race? Which would you rather, if you could wish something on your worst enemy, would you wish the 10 miles of 100, last 10 miles of 100, or the last lap of a 10K?
Gosh, I don't know. I could be unique in this. Well, actually, I would say a side note, when I knew we were doing this topic of the podcast, I was like, gosh, how long ago was it that I ran that fast in the 10K? It was like 12 years ago. So it seems like a long time ago. I would say, and this is my own experience. I'm not like generalizing this to what I think is the experience for everyone, but in the last lap or two of a 10K, or honestly, maybe a little longer than that, maybe like 1,200 meters, it feels like physically your body's shutting down, and you just have to kind of do everything you can to kind of hold on and not shut down. But it feels like almost the experience is almost like you can't really do anything about it. Like your muscles are shutting down. With the last 10 miles of 100, it feels much more like a psychological push to me. Like, yes, your body is shutting down. Of course, it probably has been for a while. And there, if you start leaking a second, when I was trying, my fastest 10K, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials, and I needed to run like a 40-second PR, which I did, but I knew like every 200 meters what I needed to be on. So if you even bleed like a half a second or 1 second, it's stressful, and you're like, oh God, I just got to hold on. But with 100, there's some wiggle room physically, but I think the mental and psychological push and strength and resilience that it takes to just keep running and keep moving is much harder psychologically. The pain is comparable but different. It's like sustained long-term discomfort. Like I've been uncomfortable for so long. But in a 10K, it's like super intense. Like, I just got to keep turning my legs over. They feel like they want to stop. So I don't know if that answers it. They're both different and hard. I honestly just think maybe one's slightly more physical. You're not going to fake your way through the last half mile or 1,200 meters of a 10K if you haven't done like the training for that. I don't think you can fake 100 miles either, but I do think you can get a lot out of yourself if you kind of have that mental strength and resilience to just keep moving.
Oh, interesting. So let's maybe ask this question. Let's say that I'm a trail runner and I'm out there, just at this time of year, just kind of trying to keep my base or whatever, running, let's say 25 to 50 miles a week on the trail, slow pace. But now I want to maybe try some of these shorter races. How would I change my training?
Well, it's mainly the composition of what. So, like Addie said, you still want to be doing speed work if you're training for a mountain 100 miler. But it's so you're always going to have speed work. You're going to have longer runs. You're going to have some degree of hill work and lots of easy running. It's the exact composition of those that matters, and you make it more and more specific. So if you're going to be running on a road race or a shorter race on the trails, you're going to be trying to mimic being on that terrain, doing those kind of paces, going above and below race pace. The mileage you put in is going to vary a bit, but if you want to be as good as possible, that mileage is still going to be relatively high to be good at any of these kind of distances. So it's really just making it more similar to the kind of things that your body and your mind will go through in the build-up. And the nice thing as well is if you want to get good at doing a 5K or a 10K, you can do lots of practice ones very easily. You can't really do like 300 milers in the couple of months before doing your peak 100 miler and expect that to be beneficial. You're just going to be completely wrecked. So at least you can get a little bit more practice by doing the actual races that way.
Addie, how many miles a week did you run when you were qualifying for the Olympics at a 10K distance?
I've always been like a higher mileage runner, which I think is what led me into ultras. 80s maybe, but I was doing 2 to 3 workouts a week, at race pace. And to kind of, my answer to the question would be, someone that was maybe like interested in ultras probably wouldn't or shouldn't or wouldn't suggest that you go straight to 100 miles if you've never done like a 50K or something. So same for speed work. If you decide, cool, I want to go run a 5K or 10K, don't hit the track and start doing like crazy intense workouts if you've never done speed work. That is a way to get injured, and introducing speed work in a like intentional way, I think, is injury preventing. It's the extra stress on tendons and muscles and the neuromuscular components will pay off later, but you have to be like smart with that. So honestly, if I have athletes that I'm coaching that maybe don't have like a traditional running background, maybe have done more like hiking or, have never done speed work or trained for the shorter distances, we might just start with strides, 3 days a week. And then that might progress to like 1-minute reps. And then you move up and up and up and be, very intentional about that. But I think it's important to remember you can't just go out and rip speed work if you've never done that. And if you've never done that, that's probably a great way to make a lot of progress in your training.
In that 80 miles that you said that you ran, how much of it was done slow and easy, in zone 2 or whatever it might be? You weren't out there doing 80 miles of track work, no doubt. So what did that look like?
Yeah, I was probably doing, I had a really great coach who I still use kind of a lot of the same framework where we were kind of training all the different areas. So we might do like 400s or 800s or something like speed work sub 5K pace or sub 10K pace. And then it's like in 1 week, and then maybe a 60-minute tempo, a little bit slower than that pace. And then like a long run with maybe a fast finish. So I would say 3 days a week were quality. And not that much volume of, my longest workout might be 7 or 8 miles of a tempo. So 15%, a lot of it was slow, easy running.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if somebody's listening and said, you know what, I think I want to introduce some of that speed. I imagine, it says Sharman Ultra coaching. It doesn't mean just all ultra. You as coaches, you have people that could steer people along the lines of becoming a more of a speed runner, work that into their program safely and efficiently, and come out the other end faster and better. I imagine not to be a commercial, but it sounds like this is something you could help people with.
I think Ian's done a great job of having like such a variety of coaching staff, and he can maybe speak to that. But, we have people like Annie who 200 mile specialist. And then, I do have a handful of people that don't run ultras at all, that do more marathons and half marathons, and tend to work with those people because of my background. So I'll let him speak to that. But I think he's done a really good job of having such a variety of coaches. Everyone could coach anybody. Everyone knows what they're doing, but just having different experiences that I think can be really useful to offer people.
And the key thing is, just because someone wants to train for a 5K or 10K or something shorter now, that might just be part of their build up to other stuff. So most of the people we coach would be longer distance runners, typically trail runners. But what we're trying to get across, I think, in this podcast is the idea that those people can benefit probably even more from doing some of these short races than someone who might have just been, say, a road marathoner and they're naturally doing a little bit more similar to this anyway. So again, just the fact that it is more varied, it's giving you a wider skill set as a runner, it's keeping it more interesting and fresh throughout the year by having different things, and hopefully giving you more physical adaptations as well. And I know a lot of the people listening are going to be more on the trail side than the road side. So there are plenty of trail races that are shorter. I used to live in the Bay Area, and there'd always be the races where you'd have like a 5K and a 10K and a half marathon and a 50K. And that was kind of they'd offer this range of different things. So sometimes I'd do a shorter one, sometimes I'd do a longer one. And that was pretty much every weekend there was something available. But it was good just to kind of dip in and out of these. And sometimes even if you're training for one particular thing, like you're training for your big, long ultra, it's good to just throw in the different thing just to see how well you can cope with the unexpected, because the long race is going to have the unexpected. So it's more of a skills practice than just a pure physical practice.
You know, are you saying that people actually sign up for the 10K at those race events? I always thought it was, if I can't make it 50K on that day, I can still have a finish at the half marathon distance or the...
I think that's how they make money, because the 50K is smaller. And then there's more people that'll do the half and the 10, and you might have one of the family members is the main runner, but other family members can do a short thing if they're not into it as much. So it does tend to be a really good way to both introduce people to the sport as well as to allow more variety there. But it does tend to be the short ones are not necessarily more competitive, but certainly have more people in them.
Okay, I'm gonna pull back the curtain here and show my ignorance after being a runner for many years. I've always heard, okay, I'm going to go out for this run today and I'm going to run a couple hours. And during that, I'm going to put in some speed work and I'm going to run for 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever at my 5K race pace. I have no idea what my 5K race pace is. How do I even know what if I've never spent any time at these shorter distances, how do I know how fast that is? How do you judge that? I know it's different for I know you're going to say, Ian, it depends, but I want to know.
You're going to be more specific than that.
Yeah, I would love to have a specific answer, because then when someone says, hey, Scott, I need you to go do this workout and I need you to do it at a 5K race pace, I can go, oh, I know exactly what that is, instead of just nodding and acting like I know.
Well, I never use race pace, although apart from maybe right before a race, it'll be race effort. And so, because then you're factoring in, is it uphill? Is it on a trail versus a road? Is it technical? Is it a hot day? Are you feeling a bit tired that day? All these different things come into it. So the better way of thinking about it, which is also then making you think about your judgment of effort and improving that skill, is to say, okay, well, you're doing 3-minute uphill reps. So imagine each of those reps, you had to keep going for 3.1 miles. Then that's your 5K effort. And you'll probably get it a bit wrong, but at least gives you a framework. And also then maybe you've got one session that's at 5K effort, another one's at 10K effort. Just try and make the 5K one a little bit harder than the 10K one. And also, I would even more say this is a great reason to do short races, because then you've got a better idea. Because you might be getting to a major way, if you haven't done a 5K for a long time. Can you hold it for 3 miles? Can you hold it for 6? Can you hold it for 3 seconds? You're not going to know until you blow up, probably. If you do a race, that gives you a bit more of an idea of how hard you were breathing, what it felt like, what was too hard. And so those races are also good for calibrating and improving the quality of your speed work as well.
That's the takeaway for today for me, guys, is I need to get out and do some of these so that I finally know what my 5K race pace or race effort. Sorry, Ian, my 5K race effort is.
and to put that at the most extreme, imagine you're doing the hardest kind of 5K, a VK, so vertical kilometer, where you're doing a 5K race, but you've got 1,000 meters of climbing. So a 3.1 mile race with about 3,300 feet straight up. So this is a sky running format. It's usually quite technical as well, but that works out as being about a 20% gradient for a 5K. So it's not exactly quick. So imagine there, you're trying to think about what would be the sustainable effort. Can you run bits of it? How fast can you hike? You're still thinking about what's going to be sustainable without having just a massive slowdown in the second half. Plus, there's going to be variations in how steep it is at different points that mean that the pace changes as well. But what's more important there, and this is why you think about effort rather than pace, is if you're doing a VK, it's not going to take the same amount of time as doing a flat 5K. So maybe it's more like your 10K or your 10-mile time. So you're thinking more in terms of how long can this effort last for rather than how far can this effort last for. And then you're factoring in all those other variables a little bit more.
Well, I've got a comment there based on all of the things you just said, not challenging it, but thinking about what you learn in a 5K or a 10K, that predictive effort or that experience or the discussion or relationship that you're having with your body, your internal chatter. What can we learn from the 10K experience? Does that move forward into a 100K experience? Can we learn from that and become, improve our relationship with effort and time and predictive ability in a short race that can extrapolate to a long race? There's a question somewhere in there, but does any of that make sense?
Go on, Addie, you take that.
Well, I mean, the first thing that always comes to mind when people ask me about that is a sports psychology concept, which is anticipatory regulation, which is essentially the name of like the mental part of pacing. It's your body assessing how long it thinks it can, what effort it can sustain based how long it thinks it has to sustain that effort. You get more intuitive with that the more you do different kinds of efforts. So I think it's like a learned skill, but it's the same skill. Every race you're doing, you're essentially kind of trying to gauge or find that, pace that you think you can hold for an hour, 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever it is. As we were talking, it actually took me, the first trail race I ever ran was a 12K uphill race 3 weeks after I ran my last track 10K. And I think that helped me a ton. Like the effort was similar. It was different at the same time. But I was even just kind of thinking back when I was one of these people that was like trying to figure out what that meant, how like, what does it mean to hold, it's the same distance essentially, but it was like twice as long of a race. So it wasn't the same pace by any means. I think it took me like an hour and something to do the 12K and 33 minutes to do the 10K. But it is like a skill that is transferable across distances. But I think that's another reason to even implement, speed work and tempos and maybe long runs with certain speed components in them, because the more variable efforts you introduce yourself to, the more you get intuitive about like what certain things should feel like. I don't even look at my watch anymore when I race or even do workouts, really. I kind of just know at this point, but I think that's something you have to learn.
Eddie, that's the second time.
Your ability to have lots of gears.
Yeah.
So just simply, as an ultra runner, we have lots of slow, or maybe a couple of slow gears. Like we can do this one for 12 hours and this one for a little bit longer, but we're not sure about, well, what happens for what's a 1 hour max, what's a marathon max effort, what's a 20-minute effort. So it just gives you more of a sense of all the gears you have. That's differing heart rates, because a lot of the slower stuff is going to be similar lower heart rates. So it just gives you more perspective on that. And the more gears you have, the more you can also identify if you're in the wrong gear. So for example, at the weekend, last weekend, I was doing a really hilly road marathon and it had about 1,800 feet of climbing. So most road marathons are pretty flat. For a trail race, that's not much. But when you're trying to keep a fairly intense kind of road effort, that's difficult. So going uphill, I was judging by my breathing and trying to think, okay, how does this feel compared to when I was running on the flat? How does this compare to other similar race distances? And a couple of times I'd catch myself and go, this feels like an effort, like I'm in a 10K. I'm in the wrong gear. Let's take it down a notch. So it allows you to make those kind of assessments before the point where you blow up. And then it's like, oh, well, clearly I went too hard there. Now I feel like crap. Instead, you can hopefully realize at a quicker point and adjust it ahead of time to get that pacing more dialed in.
Boy, Ian and Addie, you really make me feel good about my poor question. It's like delivering some scrambled eggs to a table, and I come back and you guys have reassembled it into an omelet, a Denver omelet. It actually made a lot of sense, and I enjoyed listening to it. And I've got to admit, Scott said I've got to, full disclosure here. I love to shop. I love to buy things. Can I buy a new pair of shoes to do this stuff? Do I need to? Is it a good excuse?
Why not? And you can spend a lot of money on them as well. But even if you're doing, maybe let's say it's a trail race, so you still need trail shoes. There are lighter weight trail shoes you might use for a shorter race or for speed work on the trail. There's even ones that have carbon plates in them now on the trail. I'm not sure how effective that is, given it's a softer surface and varying terrain, but there's definitely a reason to have slightly different shoes for doing a short race versus a long race.
Hey, Don, I know you still have those dolphin shorts from when you first started running. You could break those bad boys back out.
Scott, I think you've only seen those in your dreams, pal. I've never worn those for you.
What? What?
And talking about shorts, when you're doing short
Yeah.
distance racing, you wear your short shorts because it's fast. And then you change the
Oh.
mentality. So whether it's putting on your race shoes or putting on your race shorts, you can be a little bit more, I'm not sure aggressive is the word, but you can be more in the mentality of it, dress for what you're aiming to do.
Ooh, there's
Well,
a chapter in Addie's new book about that. how to dress for mental preparation.
do you feel faster? Do you do that, Ian? Do you have different kits that you wear for different distances based on what you need to perform that day? And maybe
Yeah, I mean,
they should
some
go to
people
you
might have
too,
lucky
Addie.
socks or something.
Yeah.
I definitely have. I wear short shorts whenever I do any race because it's a race mentality thing. You're trying to get everything lined up for your comfort zone, for being mentally prepared for it. So even when I'm doing a 100-miler, I'm wearing what I think of as race shorts that I wouldn't wear as much in training because it's all part of just putting you in the right mindset for what you're going to do. Certainly, if I'm doing a road race with racing shoes, that'll be different. My trail shoes tend to be about the same whether I'm doing a 5K or 100 miles. But on the road, if I put the race shoes on, I'm
Mm.
switching gear into, okay, serious racing today. Let's push it.
Let's talk about resistance training for long versus short. Does it look different? Do you recommend it? Let's just kind of open that up for discussion of getting in the gym and doing some stuff. Should I change my routine or start a routine?
I mean, I'm a big fan of, I have always implemented strength training in my routine. I think it's good even as you age, just for like injury prevention. Um, I was reflecting on when we were talking earlier about like warm up routines, and I used to show up to the track like 90 minutes before I had to race, and that's how long it took me to do everything that I needed to do. And so, what I always found really helped, especially as I got older on the track. I mean, I think I raced on the track until I was like in, I don't know, 32, 33, which is, older maybe to be doing 5Ks and 10Ks. And what kind of helped me was actually, I would say it's still kind of a form of resistance training, but was like agility training. So, and I still do that now. I think that actually translates really well to like technical trails. A lot of being able to run fast on technical trails is being able to move your feet quickly. I think that can be a limiting factor. And I have a lot of my athletes that live places where they're not running on trails do these kinds of things, but I also think it's good for speed. Jumping rope, hopping on one foot. I used to do a lot of like hurdle drills, mobility drills. I think you need kind of better range of motion to run faster, your strides elongating. So I generally think resistance training is good, period. But in terms of like speed stuff, I saw a lot of benefit from stuff that was kind of explosive and yeah, more like agility training, if that makes sense.
And to add to that, I'd say in particular, things like doing strides, doing little
Yeah.
sprints, that is a power-based thing. So that's like doing a form of strength work because you're engaging more of the muscle. There's more power going through it. Like if you have a heavier weight, it requires more power and strength. If you run faster, it requires more power and strength. And sprinting or near sprinting is getting right at the top end of that. You're having to engage more of the muscle fibers to do that. And that's also improving the brain's connection to those muscle fibers so that you're able to engage them more. So it's not necessarily that you've increased the size of the engine, you're just increasing how much of it your brain is able to engage when you run. And then even if you run slower, that'll pay off. So this isn't just to help you with the short distance races, it's a reason to do strides no matter what you're training for. But that is effectively a kind of strength work because it's helping to improve the muscle's power and ability to use that muscle's power.
You brought up a couple times, Ian, the building the size of the engine. This is an interesting, at least interesting to me. Is there a difference in the engine fuel? If I'm going to a 5K, 10K, should I be fueling any different than if I'm running a 50K?
I would say not massively. I'm seeing Addie nod, but I would say the simple thing is if you're doing sprinting, that's a different energy system. Once you get beyond about 10 or 20 seconds, any kind of distance running is very similar. So from the 800 meters up to the 200-mile, your body is going through very similar things. And you can tell this just from looking at what Olympians look like. From the 800 meters on, they are lean and look like a marathoner. And ultra runners as well. Top level ultra runners are going to be thinner and lightweight because it's all about the efficiency of moving fast. But the slower you go, the higher percentage of fat you're going to burn versus carbohydrates. But it's going to be basically those two things, a mixture of those. So even someone running the mile is still burning fat. They're just going to have a higher percentage, a relatively high percentage of what they're burning as carbs. But that means that if you train yourself for the mile and you train yourself for the 100-mile, there's a bigger overlap. It's already the same kind of things that your body needs to go through there. And you don't really need to fuel for these short distance races specifically, other than making sure you're not low on energy. You don't need to eat during these races. Until you get beyond maybe about an hour and a half, 2 hours, then you need to start taking some food in. So for most people, that means like the half marathon and above is where they typically be eating during the race. But I think most people are surprised to know that there is such an overlap between these guys running around the track 2 or more times and what we're doing in a really slow ultra. But it's the same energy systems being used in both, just in slightly different proportions.
Addie, any comments there?
Yeah, my nodding was more in relation to, I guess, like in event fueling. Like, yeah, I think day to day, maybe not a huge difference, but obviously you're not, carrying a gel with you in a mile race or a 5K or a 10K.
Speaking of
okay, rats. I don't get to carry my favorite gel on the 5K. Come on.
You can do
Go
that
ahead,
sprint
Don.
finish right at the end.
we'll have to look at your time, Scott. You may need to carry.
I may need it.
Yeah.
You don't know how slow I run.
Don't know. So we talk about there's a lot of similarities, but how about just body style? What if we're standing in front of the mirror? Can you say that genetics perfect for long distance? This body type better for short speed difference, just the makeup and the type of structure, the muscle type. I know you can't read the muscle type, but maybe you can see if it's bulky or not. So once again, for the third time, lots of words, maybe a question, standing in front of a mirror. Can you look and see what kind of athlete? Why is this gal running long distance? They are definitely, fast and a lot of speed.
Well, yes and no, but like I said, there could be someone who is fairly muscly and a bit bigger who could do well at maybe the shorter distances relative to the longer ones. But there will be certain things that'll help, but you certainly can't tell. If you look at some of the top ultra runners of all time, you've got bigger guys, smaller guys, male and female. That's the case. I mean, for example, like Hal Kerner, Scott Jurek, quite big, tall guys. The downside of that is that it's harder for them to lose heat. So funny that they're both Western States winners, given that that's actually a detrimental factor of being bigger like that. But then you see smaller, leaner people as well. So there's probably a wider variety because in ultras, first of all, more of it comes down to the mental side. So the physiology is important, but it's not as determinant as like all the people in the 10,000 meter Olympics race look very similar. You're going to get a much bigger difference between the elites at the start of UTMB. Some might be stronger or better developed for uphill, some for downhill, some for efficiency, some for eating, some just really mentally tough. So there's just more factors coming into it. So I wouldn't say you could say a whole lot just from body type, but it's also very trainable. So the more you train for long, slower stuff, or the more you train for sprints, the more you can bias your body to getting better at the type 1 or the type 2 muscle fibers. So for example, like when I was younger, I was a pretty good sprinter. Now I'm horrible. I wasn't fast, but I was very quick on like a soccer field to get to the ball. So over about 30 yards, I was genuinely quick. Now I feel like I'm in slow motion, despite in every other way, I'm a better runner, but I'm a worse sprinter because I've trained longer stuff. So that has improved. And when one improves, the other one, there's a trade-off.
In the UK, did they have the show The Bionic Man, where he's sprinting like at 60 miles an hour, but it's in slow motion?
I know.
Maybe it's a
I
little.
don't think I ever
Maybe
saw
there's a
it.
relation.
I've seen like clips of just the slow motion stuff. Yeah.
And it was a $6 million man, Scott. They had a price tag on that show. $6 million.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. You were too young then. I remember.
It was inflation. It started out as $1 million. Hey, Addie, I'm curious. So you've now been running ultras and trails. You've written a book on mental preparation and mental management. You're older and you're wiser. Has the experience of running the longer races and learning it more about the mental and psychological side, if you could put that brain in your 20-some-odd-year-old body, do you think you would have been more successful?
Yeah, totally. I have never gone back to a road marathon, since I started on trails, which has not been because I couldn't, I just haven't. And I often think that if I knew what I know now, which I could go back. They didn't have super shoes when I was running road marathons. So that's also been appealing to me. I'm like, I probably could have run 5 minutes faster. Totally. It hasn't, super appealed to me. I think just because I trained that way for a really long time, and I still do workouts. I still do very similar workouts that I did when I was marathon training. Um, for me, it hasn't. I guess I've been more curious about how every experience can lead to better trail running. I absolutely think that could translate to going back and, approaching marathons or track races differently. But my curiosity has continued to be in the longer stuff because I don't think I've nailed 100 miles yet.
Well, this is like our last discussion. I was saying how trails can improve your road running, roads can improve your trail running. It's good to be more well-rounded. And it's good to do a little bit of everything. Of course, when you're getting closer to an A race, you're getting very specific to that. You're not going to throw in your road 5K the day before you do a hard rock or something like that. But it is very helpful because it's also just keeping you thinking. The more you're doing something a little bit out of your comfort zone, the more you're having to engage the brain to problem solve and judge effort. And that's exactly what you're going to have to do on race day. So even if it seems like it's a very different environment, it's the same toolkit you're using to deal with that.
So I'm going to go back to me considering buying some shoes. Addie, do you think that a person should invest in those carbon plate shoes to get out on the road? Do you think there's real advantages? You said if they had those back then, things might have been, numbers might have been different. What's your thought on these new shoes?
I mean, I do. I run for Nike. I've run and I've done workouts and long runs in, the Alpha Flies, and we have the Ultra Flies now. And for sure, I see a difference. I think that they can be a little bit abused. I will often be like walking around the lake. I live here in Denver, and I'll see someone in, the Alpha Flies, which are a very expensive shoe, and they're running a slow, easy run. And like, that's not what they're for. They really should kind of just be for racing, in my opinion. I think both because they do change your mechanics some. I think they could, cause some injuries if you're doing too many miles. I think the effort is different. You don't want to have kind of some skewed opinion of effort. So yes, I think they objectively can help you run faster. And I think people maybe overuse them.
I totally get what you're saying there, but also I would say, even though I'm not like in any way affiliated with these, I use super shoes a lot now for my road running. And I think the benefit there could be, and this might be why we're seeing these marathon world records going down, it's not just that it's potentially faster on race day and more efficient on race day, but it could also allow you to get less muscle damage in training. Mm-hmm. So bear in mind, there's a lot of individual variation. So they've done quite a bit of testing, independent testing, to see all the different brands of super shoes. And you can have the same runner be quicker in one pair of super shoes and slower in another pair of super shoes compared to their standard racing flats. So you don't know for certain that any given pair of shoes will make you quicker. But I would argue that one of the things that might be helping is if it allows those pro runners or someone who's really training hard for something to do a little bit more training for the same amount of muscle damage, that could be giving them some benefits as well. So there is potentially a reason to do even the easy runs like that. And I do my easy runs like that, aiming to then be more recovered for the next day. But it's a very expensive way to do things.
Don asked that question selfishly. I knew exactly what he was thinking when he asked the question, because he and I recently purchased a very expensive trail running shoes that have a carbon plate in them. And every time we go out for a run, Don says, "Oh, these shoes are the best shoes in the whole world. These are the best shoes I've ever run in." And I'm going, I bet you I could put you in some slippers or some flip-flops and you'd say the same thing. So he's just looking for backup for him spending that much money on a pair of shoes. Yeah, so, isn't it right?
Yeah, so officially I heard a yes from both coaches that I need to go shopping, and I should be on Amazon Prime right now getting them ordered. Hey, you talked about gait. Let's talk about gait changing between my long, slow versus my question. Faster. Let's talk about that.
Go on, Addie.
Just generally, just talk about it.
Well, yeah, I'm not real good at questioning. And
is it different?
Yeah, you guys are great at answering.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's it's not something I do in a super calculated way or give like a specific number, but I think just having the intention of like increasing your cadence. Like I think sometimes if you haven't done a lot of speed work, there could be like a tendency to like overstride, like you're trying to like run fast and have this big stride. Yes, your stride is bigger and longer when you're running faster, and it's also kind of about turnover and quicker feet. I have seen myself, I'm 37 now, I've been training seriously since I was 11. Like I've got a lot of miles on my body, And I've seen the less speed work and strides I do, the tighter, stiffer, like more injuries I have. It's also like one of the most specific ways you can kind of stretch and have mobility. I think the gait does change, the mechanics change, and I think that can be a good thing. Not can be, is a good thing when done like in an intentional way.
And I'd say there should be some variation, but you should look fairly similar if you're running at your slowest or if you're running at your fastest. If it's dramatically different, then you're probably either overstretching a bit with the fast stuff because you're not used to it, or you're losing a lot of efficiency when you go slower. So you'll often see people kind of shuffle a bit more when they're going slower. That you want to avoid that, because that means that if you're in an ultra, you're going to be shuffling there even from the beginning. And it's kind of like what I was talking about, having different gears. If you're used to running the slower speeds and the faster speeds, then your body can do all these things. But the main difference when you're going slower is that your stride is going to be a bit shorter, but how your foot lands should be fairly similar. How your body posture should be in terms of being upright with a tiny forward lean, ideally. But it is something where if you were to watch yourself as you go past a mirror or you're in a gym and you can see a mirror, you should look fairly similar, slow or fast. If you don't, then there's probably some loss of efficiency there.
Don, I'm going to remind you and everybody listening about a running clip that's on Natural Running Center that Mark Cucuzella has, where he actually has a side view, a profile view of him running at different paces, and it almost looks identical. It's a really fun video to go watch. I'll if I can remember, I'll link that in the show notes so people can go look at that. But I remember when I saw that the first time and going, you mean he's running like 2 minutes per mile faster? And it's just the cadence.
Well, the cadence will change a little bit, but not as much. It'll probably be more the stride length.
Right,
A bit more
sorry.
power, so you cover a bit more ground, but the cadence will vary, and everyone's heard of the 180 steps per minute being the kind of so-called perfect. Somewhere around that is reasonable for when you're running faster. When you're running slower, it will be a bit lower than that. So particularly in an ultra, it's typically going to be below 180, but it shouldn't be too far below. So my kind of warning sign is if someone has a number of steps per minute less than about 160, then they're probably overstriding and losing some efficiency there. But if you're going slower, it should be a slightly lower cadence.
When you start a long run, this goes to either one of you or any of the three of you, you start off at a certain cadence, whatever it might be, 170, just to pick a number out. Do you keep that same cadence all the way through? Are you able to do that? Is that a goal?
Depends on the terrain. If I'm going uphill, my cadence is higher because you've got these little pitter-patter steps. If I'm going downhill, it might be a bit lower because you're trying not to be too tired. Also, the speed you're going at, so if you're doing a short race or a short run versus a longer, slower run. But it'll vary more based on the terrain, I would say. So my watch, like most people watches, tells you what your stride is the whole time. If I do a road marathon, it is pretty much dead on like 178 to 182 the entire time. And there's no change at the end. If I do a trail race, it's mainly going to change when I hike, realistically, because it's going to be a slower cadence there. But when I'm running, it's just the uphills that'll tend to be a bit faster. But it shouldn't be changing too much when you run at any point. Otherwise, again, you're losing efficiency. Maybe you're shuffling, and your body just your form is falling apart at that stage.
Yeah, so it's not so much the fatigue of your body; it's more the terrain you're hoping is dictating that change of cadence.
What about you, Addie?
I actually agree. I think that's one of the unique factors of trail running is it changes a lot more on in a trail race than it would like in a road marathon, which I think is actually like something to think about. I think that's it also that changes like the stress. If you having the same stride, which is a requirement, to help maintain a consistent pace over the course of a road marathon. Also, I think fatigues you. It fatigues you differently because it's like the repeated stress for 2.5, 3 hours, 4 hours, however long it is. So, you're often thinking about that or should be thinking about that maybe in ultra races of kind of varying the load as dictated by, the terrain. You might have a shorter, like Ian said, I tend to run most uphills. I don't hike a lot. So I have like kind of little short ones. And then if you're doing a downhill, maybe you have a longer stride because you're trying to use the downhill. So there's a lot more variation in the load on your body.
In fact, if I look at data after I've done a trail race, I can tell when I'm hiking because it's the cadence that's different. The pace not always is that much different. You might be hiking well versus kind of jogging on the spot. And I've hiked past people who were running uphill because they're doing a running motion, but they're really not they might as well be hiking. They're just bouncing up and down. But I find that looking at the data afterwards, I can easily tell how much of the race I was hiking and where I was, because it's the cadence that'll tell you that.
And Scott, you may have to clear this up because maybe my memory's a bit foggy, but I think I remember Anton Karpichka saying to keep focus as he's getting deep into the miles, he'll call back and listen to his cadence and bring that back into presence so that he has a rhythm to follow and to help bring him back into his zone. Do you remember that, Scott? Or maybe either one of you have comments on that, listening to your foot strike and pattern.
But that sounds very similar to the idea of having different gears. That you're thinking, oh, I'm in the wrong gear. I'm going too hard. I'm going too easy. My stride pattern has changed. And you're just trying to get a sense of what it feels like. I suppose to some degree what it sounds like. Also, your breathing's coming into that. But that's exactly what I'm thinking about. I can consciously go, okay, this is too hard. And then I drop that a little bit, and the cadence changes very slightly. The form doesn't change. The cadence and the stride length change slightly. And you can just very noticeably feel you're in a different gear. And so it'd be that same kind of thing of being conscious about it and thoughtfully doing this rather than it just being the result of I'm tired and it's changed. You're trying to think about it. Also, you're trying to avoid getting too tired and then it changes more than it has to.
You know, I want to try something different as we close out this episode. We're going to do final thoughts of the topic. And I'll start out so that you guys have time to think about this. But final thoughts, whether it's a gold nugget or a something that you think is important to this topic of going from long trail runs to maybe shorter distances. And I'll start off. I think one of the big ahas for me is what Ian said at the beginning, that by going to a shorter race or a shorter distance, you can see larger gains in a quicker amount of time, and maybe helps avoid some of the burnout that you may have out there running the same loop or the same terrain or the same distances week after week. So I think that's my final thought is I'm going to get out and maybe try to work myself. And I think that's also a key is you got to work yourself into a shorter distance. That's kind of counterintuitive. You would think if you're going shorter to longer, there's more of a ramp up, but I think there's also a ramp up going from long to short. I'm going to do that because I think that it's going to be beneficial for me to see some progress and some gains. Anyway, let's go around the horn. Who's next, Don?
Yeah, I'll go next. And off a recent experience where we went a bit faster on a loop than we're used to, and the changes that you feel or the experience that you feel, the endorphins that are there. There's a difference between slogging out a loop and then putting some real effort into it. You feel different when you're done, and it's exhilarating, and it feels purposeful, and it feels good. So it feels good to get out there and do something different with the body. I think it's a real a benefit. And so this conversation helped me see that's a good thing to do.
You know, my grandma, I remember one time I was visiting her, and she had an older car that had, I don't know what kind of engine it had in it, but it didn't have the catalytic converter and all that. She goes, "Hey, would you mind taking my car out on the freeway and blowing the carbon out of it?" And I go, "What?" And she goes, "I drive around town and I'm a grandma. I drive it around slow." She says, "Sometimes it just needs to get out there and go fast, really fast to kind of blow out the engine, blow the carbon out of the exhaust and engine." That's what I'm thinking of when you say that, Don.
Oh, yeah, I like how you think of an old car with carbon when you think of me. What about you,
It's
Coach?
like getting rid of the rust, but it's the same kind of idea, yeah.
Final thoughts, Ian?
I would say that probably something we haven't exactly mentioned, but one of the things that you want to do with these races and to see improvement with them and to have them then make you better at the longer stuff as well is make sure you're getting good at finishing well. So I talked about putting it in different thirds in the race and that you're saving enough to avoid fading. But you want to make sure that you can finish, whether it's a speed session or a short distance race, without slowing down. Because that's not only teaching you good pacing, it's also going to be much more mentally positive, but it's something that does take conscious effort because most people in most races go out too fast and fade. So if you're going to do your 5K, it's very easy to do that. But if you do a few of them, see how much you can improve. They could be time trials, they could be races, whatever you want to do. But just doing some of these short races and practicing having a strong finish, because that's probably one of the biggest skills that'll be transferable then to doing the same kind of thing in a longer race.
And Ian, we can do that. It occurred to me as you were saying that we could do that on a training run. We can listen to our effort and know where the finish line is, and we can start regulating, self-regulating, and listening, just not on with a bib on, but just with our shoes on.
Well, in particular speed session, that's what I'm saying in that environment as well. If you're doing reps, don't have the last ones be hanging on for dear life. Make sure your last reps are the fastest. Not like they're way quicker, but they're not slower than the rest.
Addie.
Good points. Addie?
I just, generally think that like variety is a good thing. If you're kind of just always training the same thing, you're gonna plateau. You have to add like a different stress. And I think speed is a really good way to do that, and something that probably a lot of people training for ultras are missing, or maybe don't think could actually have as big of an impact as it does on. I remember I ran CCC this summer, and I was doing like fast, hard 2-minute repeats on like a little gravel track like 3 days before. And that's actually what made me feel like kind of most ready. Like, this feels smooth. I feel good. So there is a correlation. And I think, again, if it feels kind of scary and daunting, then it's probably an indicator that's even more what you should be doing, because it's probably what you're lacking.
Nice. I think a lot of good takeaways from today's conversation, and from a couple of experts at it. It's nice to compare thoughts and hear from your experiences, which is great. And Ian has a number of coaches there that have this type of experience and can help people safely move into that area of speed without feeling like they need to be on the sidelines for a while to recover from it. So that's important. Mr. Warren, any close here? You want me to finish this off with a run moss? Do we need to explain what run moss is, Scott? You had a couple emails.
That's actually, I'm glad you said that. We had somebody from New Zealand email me the other day, and they said, at the end of the podcast, you guys say run muss or run moss. What does that mean? And I had to explain to him. I said, well, moss is Spanish for more. And he goes, well, down in New Zealand, we don't have a lot of Spanish speakers. And we kind of laughed about that. And I said, well, how do Kiwis say more? And he says, well, we speak English down here. I don't know how many times you've been to New Zealand, but he says the Maori people have a word called atu. So we're going to change it up today in response to this listener and say run
atu.
There we go.